Welcome. I'm Sister Who. Often I make references to the Bible because I was raised Roman Catholic and thus my initial spiritual background is Christian. It's not the only book that I read or the only system of spirituality to which I refer, but it's the one I'm most familiar with, and so I use it for illustrating different things about life as I learn them and as I talk about them. The one I wanted to bring up today is in the very first book in the Bible, Genesis, in which, right after the creation story, we have Adam and we have Eve and their first family, and now they have two sons, Cain and Abel, and there's jealousy between the brothers, and Cain kills his younger brother Abel as the first murder recorded in the Bible. God comes looking for Abel because Abel was someone who had done all sorts of things to please God and to honor God in all he did. And, of course, God can't find Abel because he's been murdered and his body's been hidden or buried or something. And God says to Cain, "Where's Abel?" And Cain says, basically, "I don't know. Am I my brother's keeper?" And God, being what God is, proceeds to state the truth of the matter and to deal with the situation. Where this becomes relevant to me in the present is when I meet people who are in a sense following that same pattern. That they're in a sense saying to the rest of the world, to God, "Am I my brother's keeper?" Not as a legitimate question, but as a way of dismissing responsibility. Now, on one hand, people need to be able to be responsible for the consequences of their own actions. They need to not be protected from themselves and what they do. They need to have their own lives, be able to make their own choices, have their own consequences, and also have their own rewards. It's not something that we can do for each other. Kind of like in weightlifting, the one who wants the muscles has to lift the weights. If I am a decent person, though, by my personal definition of decency, I have a responsibility to do whatever nurturing, supportive thing that I can, in fact, do. If there's nothing I can do, well, then there's nothing I can do. But if there is something I can do, if I'm a decent, loving person with any sense of compassion, I need to do it. I need not just to talk about it, not just to think of it, but I need to do it. I need to refrain from saying, "Why ask me? Am I my brother's keeper?" Well, I'm not responsible for my brother's choices and consequences, but I am responsible to express love and to do whatever I can to be nurturing and supportive to my brother or sister, whatever actual person that role may be filled by. Let's see if I can think of an example. What's a good example? If my brother wants to, that's a metaphor. If someone wants to build, if they want to build a tool shed, and they don't know anything about it, they've never built one before. On one hand, it's not my responsibility to build it for them. If they ask me, if they tell me, "I want to build a tool shed," and as a decent, compassionate person, I say, "Well, do you know how to build a tool shed?" Because I happen to know. Well, first of all, I'll hope that they'll be honest enough to tell me if they don't know, rather than think that I'll think any less of them just because they don't know how to build a tool shed. I mean, not everyone has built a tool shed. Why should everyone know how? So if I can trust them to be honest with me and say, "Well, no, actually I don't know how to build it," We can sit down at a table. I can draw out some rough sketches and just say, well, if you make it this shape and you want it to be this long, well, you go to the lumber yard and these are the sorts of things you need. You need the posts to be this far apart and the walls to be made out of this and the roof to be made out of that. And this is the order you build things in. And I can give them a set of directions and they can go off and build it and have a good tool shed. That's an entirely different responsibility than to say I should do it for them. And to my way of thinking, it's a whole lot more decent than saying, go find a book in the library, I don't want to be bothered with this. If I know how to build a tool shed and they simply want to know how to build a tool shed, it's not that big of a deal to tell them. Now, even if I know how to assemble an automobile from scratch, that's probably too complex to get into at that point. That's what I mean when I say there are things, am I legitimately able to respond to this or not? Let me do what I can and allow the person to assume responsibility for their own life for dealing with the rest. And this can apply to a whole lot of different things. The point is simply that we don't get into saying, it's not my job, it's not my responsibility, I don't need to be involved in this. Because ultimately we're all in this together. And the person that I help today may be the one who rescues me tomorrow. Everything is interconnected. And I cannot ignore someone else's need if I believe in there being a world that responds to people in need. To the extent that someone has a need and expresses it, and I don't respond when I am, in fact, able to respond, to that extent, I'm contributing to a world in which nobody's needs are going to be answered. A lot of it has to do with what kind of world do I want to live in? What kind of world do I want future generations to live in? What kind of world do I want to leave behind? What kind of world do I want to live in for the rest of my life? I want to live in a world where there's artistic expression, where an artist isn't limited to doing only those sorts of things that have already been done. I also want to live in a world where an artist has to work at the art. I wish to be respectful, but from my perspective, I don't know that I really want to pay $1,000 for a canvas that has essentially had paint thrown at it from 6 feet away. To some people that's art, and I want to respect their opinion and their perspective. But it's not the kind of thing that I'm able to choose to hang on my living room wall, because to me that's not art. I believe in their right to create that art, in their right to express that, but I choose not to purchase it and to own it because it doesn't communicate to me in the way that perhaps a detailed Romanticist painting from Van Gogh's time might. Art is a very subjective thing. I don't want a world in which there is one definition of art that everyone has to live up to, and one definition that everyone has to fit within, like some sort of box. But I do want a world that supports artists in developing their art, in expressing their creativity, in welcoming them into society. The town I grew up in, the primary idea I got about an artist was that it's a nice hobby. It's not something you can ever make a living off of. The problem, of course, is that the amount of time it takes to perfect art, the amount of time it takes to become Michelangelo or Van Gogh or Rembrandt or any of the huge number of artists, the amount of time and energy and concentration it takes to learn how to write like Shakespeare is difficult to do when your time is consumed with all the other tasks, making clothing, plowing the fields, and the myriad of other things that fill a day. That being the case, I would like to see society get back to a place where we support the artists and allow them to focus on the work that they can do. And for the person who just feels an affinity with the earth and with living, growing plants, to give them the tools they need to be the best farmer that the world has ever seen, the most productive farmer, the most efficient and effective farmer that the world has ever seen. And to the person who absolutely thrills to be able to pass knowledge along to younger generations, to give them the tools they need and the encouragement they need to focus upon teaching in whatever school system fits best with their particular personality. See, all of these things actually, as I understand it, were aspects of tribal societies such as the whole world had before the rise of Christianity, before the rise of large patriarchal governments, governments that were by patriarchal, especially oriented toward men. There was something in having both the perspective of a man and the perspective of a woman in an equal balance that brings a greater health to society. And when you involve an entire tribe, you have more perspectives yet. And in the combining of all these perspectives, a combination of wisdom about how to live life and how to structure society is created that empowers everyone. And we all wind up richer for it. By insisting on conformity, for example, that the only viable artist in today's society is a graphic artist, someone who does layout for magazines and newspapers, someone who does specific forms. By demanding that sort of conformity and that sort of narrow focus, there's a whole lot of ways of understanding that don't happen. And there's a whole lot of perspectives that aren't shared and that aren't seen. And what we wind up with is tunnel vision, where all you see is what's right in front of you. And you don't understand. It's like having no peripheral vision. To bridge to a personal story here. Before coming here to Montana, I did about 55 shows actually in another state. And anyone who wants a little bit of a mystery, just if you're that curious in the chronology of Sister Who, there are one or two episodes that were done on during a particular production session in which you will see that the facial makeup is reversed. Where my right eye is framed in purple, the left one was framed in purple, and the white one was framed in white. The whole makeup was switched in reverse. The reason this happened is because less than 24 hours before that production, I got hit in the eye with a chisel. And it was a very serious sort of accident, but the skin was intact enough and the production was scheduled, and in the last 24 hours there was no way, supposedly, that I would be allowed to cancel the production. And so in an effort to put less stress on the right eye, I switched the makeup so that the finer detailing of the purple would be around the left eye, and the white eye, the right eye would be framed in white and would have less stress put up on it. So somewhere back in the records, if you ever want to go digging, you'll see a couple episodes like that, and those are the ones that were done less than 24 hours after that accident. The reason for mentioning this is the way it happened is totally comedic. If it wasn't so serious, it would be very funny. It was so dorky. It's kind of that very human tendency that grows out of curiosity. If you're walking along a fence, along a sidewalk, for example, and you hear a noise on the other side, and there is one little knothole in the fence, who is not going to look through the knothole to see what the sound was? Well, I happened to be doing something like that, looking through a hole for some sort of sound on the other side, right when the chisel came out of the hole. Totally ridiculous. So if you ever see a hole and hear noise, don't look through. The point of it in telling this is that it affected my peripheral vision. And I don't have a lot of patience with doctors that won't listen to me, but I think doctors do wonderful things, but the particular eye doctor I was dealing with at the time, and I was not able to find a better eye doctor, hunting all over the place, trying to find someone who would listen to me. And I kept telling him something's wrong with my peripheral vision. And he wouldn't believe me. But it's my eye. I can tell something's wrong with my peripheral vision. It was 2.5 years before I convinced someone to take a really close look at that eye. And by that time, there was a really significant retinal detachment. The back of my eye was absolutely coming loose, and I had to have an operation to repair it. And it was completely successful, so there's a happy ending. But the reason for mentioning all this is simply that it was an experience for me in not having peripheral vision on the right side of my head. I mean, as you bring they say the way you test peripheral vision is to bring your finger around, and as soon as you can just see it out of the corner of your eye while looking straight ahead, which right now is right here. But right after that chisel hit my eye, it was about right here. All this space, I couldn't see. It was like there was a black curtain pulled that far forward around my head because of the damage that had been done to my right eye. The peripheral vision lets you know when things are coming at you from the side. It gives you a context for the one thing that you're looking at right in front of you. In the same way, spiritually and socially, there needs to be peripheral vision. Social peripheral vision would be, to use a common example, in Germany in the early 1930s, if someone had had adequate social peripheral vision, they would have been able to see this thing coming of this person called Adolf Hitler, who was rising up through the political ranks, assuming more and more power. And the explanation that's always given to me is they thought he would take care of the communists because they didn't want the communists. Well, but the problem is everybody matters and we're all in this together. And everybody knew Adolf Hitler was not a good person, but they thought that he would take care of the bad people, meaning the people they didn't approve of, and that then they would deal with them at that point. Well, by the time he had done that, he had amassed enough power that nobody could stop him. That's what peripheral vision has to do with. Something coming at you and you see it before it's right there. You can react to it. You get a broader perspective on things. Spiritually, having that peripheral vision is, one way of putting it might be that there is that which is God, and around God are all these ideas that kind of relate to it, but they're not at the center, and they're not what God is, but they kind of relate to it, and they tell us a lot about how to approach and how to interact in this environment. Spiritually, there's all different kinds of levels of trust as well. There's all the things the minister says. Well, is the minister right or not? Well, if it's all you see, anything any minister might say, anything any cult leader might say, might be it. If you have a broader perspective, and while you're looking at a particular thing that serves your focus the best, in your spiritual peripheral vision, you might see Catholic, Buddhist, Hindu, Mormon, Jehovah's Witness, Baptist, Presbyterian, Lutheran, all these other different Eastern Orthodox, all these different ways of looking at this realm of spirituality. And you focus on a particular point that works best for you. But you have all these other perspectives. And the more you're aware of them, the more you're aware of the picture of spirituality, and the more you can understand, the more you're sensitive to different kinds of patterns. One of the things, for example, I often hear in terms of religious cults is that there are control issues. Patterns where people stop thinking for themselves, and the leader of whatever group this is does all the thinking for them, tells them what to believe, how to act, how to dress, how to be, everything. They don't have to think about it for themselves. Well, while that feeds into the old saying, there's strength in numbers, it also is kind of metaphorical of the lemmings as well. The lemming is a small animal that lives in the far north, and for no apparent reason, every so often, all the lemmings suddenly start marching in this great big parade off a cliff and into the ocean where they all drowned. And that's where I say, but God gave you a brain, and you need to be able to think for yourself. And you need to recognize when we're becoming too much like lemmings, and when we're headed for the ocean, and when the person in charge who's doing all the thinking for everyone made a mistake. And without spiritual peripheral vision, it's much harder to see those things. It's much harder to know when the person in charge has gone too far, when the spiritual connection with that which is God that you're looking for simply cannot be handed to you. When, like the weightlifter, you have to go lift your own weights in order to have those muscles. You want the spiritual connection, you need to go home, shut the door, do your praying, do your meditating, do whatever it is you do to achieve that spiritual connection. Meditation is a wonderful thing because you can focus on a Bible verse, you can focus on an idea, you can focus on an emotion, you can focus on whatever you want to focus upon. You can focus on a feeling of peace that doesn't specify any person or situation. You can focus on a word, you can focus on a number. The point in all meditation, though, is that nobody can do it for you. You have to do your own. In my understanding of spirituality, it's the same sort of thing. Nobody can do it for you. You have to do your own. What happens in churches, what happens in gatherings, is a corporate sort of worship, where by all being in the same place, there is a power of music and a power of emotion that is more than what you can accomplish on your own. It still does not take the place of that which you need to do for yourself. It feels wonderful, it probably is wonderful, but it's not all there is, and it's not all you need. I get up in the morning, and I begin the day by looking in the mirror. And the person in the mirror is the one that I have to understand better than anyone else, because everything that affects that person, and everything that person chooses, and everything that person does, I'm going to be absolutely involved with. I need to understand who the person in the mirror is, how the person in the mirror identifies himself, what dreams that person has, where that person expects life to go, who that person is willing to talk to or wants to avoid during the day. I need to understand and relate to that person. I don't need to be obsessed with self-evaluation, but I need to have a launching pad of self-identity from which I can launch every creative and wonderful thing I want to do with life. My full name is Sister Who Does She Think She Is? And who we think we are has a lot to do with how we present ourselves to the world and with how we present ourselves to the person in the mirror, with the tasks and the challenges that we're willing to take on, with the involvements that we're willing to embrace, with the responsibilities we're willing to accept, with the songs we're willing to sing, with the ideas we're willing to consider, with the ideals that we're willing to commit our life to. But it doesn't stop there. It starts there like the launching pad of a rocket and can go to the moon or to Mars or to somewhere even way beyond that. The Bible says we're created in God's image. In being created in God's image, one of the things that I believe is there, though it may take us a long time to work through even the early stages of it, is that there are no limits except those we put on ourselves. There's no question that can't be asked, no feat that can't be wisely attempted, no area of life that can't be studied. And for everything that's real, there's no amount of questioning that needs to be the least bit threatening. The only thing questions can reveal, really, is greater understanding. Manipulations and twisting and deception can create very damaging things. But honest questions in and of themselves can only create more understanding. And so we have the show, and I put myself out there, so to speak, asking questions, seeking answers, but seeking only those answers that will bring new questions. I don't want an answer that ends the process. I don't want an answer that ends the questioning. I don't want an answer that says there is no more. There is nothing more to learn. There is nothing more to be. There is nothing more to become. There is nothing new to discover, and there's nothing new to experience. That sort of answer, to me, is opposed to the existence of life that is abundantly real, abundantly beautiful, and abundantly potential.